Kia ora, thank you. I'll try and get picked up. Thank you. I'll try not to talk as fast as I usually do because we'll have a lot of dead time. But at the same time, the trick is trying to get me to shut up once I do start talking. So if I glance off into the distance, it's at the timekeeping notice over there. So first of all, legislation and policy can have unintended consequences and can also have unrealized problems or won't allow things to happen the way we would like them to. If we think of unintended consequences, the move away from caged battery hens to free-range hens, suddenly eggs can't be sourced. We knew the change was coming in terms of how hens can be used to produce eggs, and then overnight eggs are in short supply. And outside of the industry, nobody seemed to expect that was going to happen. We thought we'd turn up at the supermarket the next day and all our eggs would be free range and we wouldn't have to read all the labels to figure out which ones to buy. We've then found, and even to now, you pick your day of when you go looking for eggs and you hope you can find some. So what happened there? In the meantime, a lot of us, we've figured out how to perhaps use fewer eggs in our baking as well. And there are alternatives out there, and we have to be more aware of the alternatives. There's another piece of legislative change or policy change coming that sounds similar, but we probably won't notice. And that's a move away from a practice called crating with sows. And this is putting pregnant pigs in crates when they furrow, when they give birth to piglets. And this is likely to be banned. What will that mean? Well, in a similar way to the ban for caged hens, well, we see the next day pork not available in the supermarket. And we probably won't notice the impact of that outside of the industry. We won't see it on our supermarket shelves because we also import a lot of pork. We don't import a lot of fresh eggs. They're a biosecurity risk. We do import a lot of pork, and we're unaware of the welfare standards that are in place where that pork is produced, perhaps overseas somewhere. And so New Zealand can argue that it has some of the highest animal welfare codes, and we're going to improve those more if we ban crating. We won't see a change in pork. What we will see probably is more pork in the supermarket that is actually produced following codes that don't apply here in New Zealand. So we might assume that our pork is cage-free, but it probably won't be. And this will happen overnight and we won't see it. And so perhaps we should be raising the question, what we import, should we insist it be subject to the same laws and practices as what we do here as well? Because we can't assume that that's the case of what we buy on the supermarket shelf. So there's a need for education there as well. Legislation and policy also can not enable the sort of change we would hope to see. Just a few years ago, it was announced that we could grow hemp for food and fiber, but the little fine print there is only for human food consumption. It wasn't made legal, it was an exemption to existing laws that allows hemp to be grown and used for food and fiber for human use. Not a single stem, not a single leaf, not a single hemp seed shell can be fed to livestock. If you do that, that's a misuse of the Drugs Act violation. So we have this appearance that hemp is now legal. We can go to the supermarket, we can buy hemp bliss balls, we can buy hemp fabric and such. But if you feed one of those bliss balls to a dairy cow, you're violating the Misuse of Drugs Act. And so outside of the hemp industry, most people are probably not aware of that. So what do we do with waste product from the hemp industry? At the moment, we either burn it or bury it. We can't feed it to livestock. The hemp hearts we buy in the supermarket, which are good in salads and smoothies and such, when they are processed, they have a hull removed from the seed. And that seed has a lot of similarities to palm kernel expeller, a thing we import to feed dairy cattle. But we can't feed it to dairy cattle. So we have unrealized potential. And so there's an education need there as well. But also the knock-on effects are that if we were to feed these products to our livestock, we wouldn't be able to export much of our livestock food and in some cases fibre to certain overseas markets. The recent news around pine plantations and the impacts of cyclones up north. To me, there's two things here that strike me. One is the headlines around the cyclones. I grew up in Christchurch. I lived through the Christchurch quakes. I can take the current headlines, scratch out the word cyclone and put Christchurch quake, and it seems nothing has changed. The time it takes to settle insurance, the time it takes to give people certainty around their businesses, their houses, their roads, it still seems to take just as long, and people are surprised and frustrated, and understandably, why don't they have an answer now? And so we haven't learnt from that. I hope we learn from what's happened around pine plantations and how rampant planting sounded good. We've got more trees. Everybody can agree we need more trees, but we have to seriously ask what type. And if we were to ban exotic pine plantations, we shouldn't assume that would mean everything would become native plantations overnight. The issues might simply be, where do we source the seedlings from? Can we grow them sufficiently to plant native forests? But it may just actually mean that native forests aren't worth planting because the financial mechanisms that work very well for pine don't work for natives. So banning something overnight doesn't mean that something that could be better will actually happen. The recent headlines around cyclones also points to an industry that's probably going to move further south, particularly around horticulture. As they continually lose plants and trees and infrastructure, they will look to parts of the country to set up where they can avoid or minimize the impact of cyclones. And we will see changing land use at this end of the island that might surprise many. We will probably see in our lifetime as a response to climate change and changing climate, but also to get away from the impacts of climate change, avocados as a commercial crop. What will that actually mean to how we use land down here and the infrastructure that's in place to support that? And we have to ask questions around, will we be using land for that purpose in the future as well? We can't assume that we can just pick up sticks in one place and reset up in another. So are we learning lessons from the past? We're human, we're very bad at doing that. The difference I feel today is that we ask questions far more often than we may have a generation ago. We have a panel here of diverse backgrounds that we probably wouldn't have seen 2 or 3 generations ago in New Zealand talking about these matters. So I think we're starting to learn from the lessons of the past. It's how we implement them in the future will be very telling. Will we learn? I hope so. So I'll wrap up there. I've got the nearly finished sign. That'll do me.